Good evening. My name is Edie McCurry, and I am the president of BridgeND. Welcome to our annual ConvergeND event. BridgeND is a multi-partisan organization with the goal of bridging the political divide through respectful, productive, and engaging discourse. The goal of our club is not to create moderates, but to revive our ability to disagree well. It is for this reason that we decided to host a debate between college Democrats and college Republicans. It is no secret that our nation's political climate is charged and that the effects of this are devastating. Before we can improve the political climate out there, we need to improve the political climate here. It is our hope that this debate will serve as a reminder that respectful political discussion is still possible and can be done well. Following the debate, audience members will have the opportunity to ask the debaters questions. If time allows, there will be a small discussion at each of your tables about the topics covered in the debate today. We hope you gain a new perspective from someone who may hold different opinions from you. My VP, Sophia Combs, will now introduce our moderator and debaters.
Our moderator, Professor Lori Nathan, is director of the Kroc Institute's mediation program. He has extensive experience in international peacemaking, having served as senior mediation advisor to the United Nations and as a member of the UN Academic Advisory Council on Mediation from 2012 to 2018. Since 2013, he has been the lead designer and trainer of the UN High-Level Mediation course. He has participated in high-level peacemaking efforts in Africa and helped design the mediation units of the African Union and African sub-regional bodies. He has been a consultant on mediation and related issues to international organizations such as the UN, EU, and AU, as well as to the governments of Germany, Mozambique, South Africa, Swaziland, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the UK. Now moving on to our debaters. Our debaters from College Democrats are Alex Young and Alex Funk. Alex Young is a senior studying political science, public service, and constitutional studies from Louisville, Kentucky. On campus, Alex is co-president of the Notre Dame College Democrats and Student Policy Network. Alex interned in the Biden-Harris White House and in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. He's a Truman Scholar and led the effort to end corporal punishment in Kentucky schools. He currently serves as the communications coordinator for Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg. After graduating from Notre Dame, Alex will work for 2 years in public service before he attends Harvard Law School in the fall of 2028. Alex Funk is a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame, double majoring in political science and history with a minor in the Hesburgh program in public service. Originally from Stillwater, Minnesota, Funk serves as co-political director of the Notre Dame College Democrats, where she is currently helping plan the organization's spring trip to Washington, D.C., and coordinating a series of exciting guest speaker events. Additionally, she is a fellow on Senator Mallory McMorrow's campaign for U.S. Senate. Funk is passionate about public service, political engagement, and creating opportunities for students to connect with leaders in politics and policy. Now moving on to our college Republicans. Our debaters today are Shri Thakur and Luke Woodyard. Shri is a senior from Princeton, New Jersey, majoring in economics, constitutional studies, and French. He is the co-president of the Notre Dame College Republicans. And Luke Woodyard is a sophomore majoring in economics and theology with a minor in constitutional studies. Hailing from Evansville, Indiana, he is a Lilly Endowment Scholar and currently serves as a board member for Notre Dame Right to Life and chaplain for the Federal and Fiscal Challenges Club. Luke serves as a campus representative for the Hallow app and Beyond the Dome, a staff writer and photographer for the Irish Rover, and a faith commissioner in his residence hall. He is particularly interested in labor economics and the moral principles of work and idleness. I will now hand things over to Professor Nathan.
Afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you for the invitation to be the moderator of this debate. The curious thing about a democracy is that we have a tension, a contradiction between, on the one hand, a commitment to political cooperation across party lines, and to endeavoring to establish common ground between parties in the common good, for the benefit of the common good, on the one hand. On the other hand, a democracy thrives on competition, and it's competition over ideas, over interests, and above all, competition to attract voters so that each party is in a position to win an election. These tensions, cooperation on the one hand and competition on the other, are the lifeblood of a democracy, and it works subject to two caveats: that there is respect across political difference, and that there is no resort to violence. So that said, it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be in a position to moderate this debate. The procedure is as follows, and the procedure has been agreed to by the speakers. So we're not going to have any discussion on the rules of the game, and the rules are as follows. I will put a question, first the Republicans, and they will have 3 minutes to respond. Thereafter, the Democrats have 3 minutes, and we then have a further 2 short rounds of 2 minutes each. That will happen for each question. And the questions will cover immigration, healthcare, tariffs, the Israel-Palestine conflict, political violence, and the midterm elections. Right, with no further ado, let me also say that there will be a time clock evident on the screens. So I don't have to play the heavy cop on the block. I've met the speakers, they've all agreed they will they have undertaken to stick to the time limits. And this is, of course, reciprocal. If one side exceeds their time limit, then there's pressure on the other side to do the same. So it's in our collective interest to stick to the time. Good, so we're starting then with the Republican side, and the question on immigration is as follows. Do recent ICE raids represent executive overreach, or simply the implementation of a stricter immigration policy to address the leniency of past administrations? In your hands.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to BridgeND for hosting this debate, and to the College Democrats for being present tonight. I return to the stage after 3 years, but with a message that has not changed. America first. Nowhere is this credo more relevant than on the subject of immigration. 1 year ago, the United States was suffering the gravest border disaster in our nation's history. And let's be absolutely clear about what happened here. Their party did not simply lose control of the border, they surrendered it. And in doing so, they betrayed the American people. On his first day in office, President Biden eliminated Title 42, eliminated Remain in Mexico, killed the border wall, and told ICE to halt deportations. And the result was that 10 million illegal immigrants, a number greater than the population of 47 U.S. states, poured into our country, overwhelming our cities, sending the price of housing soaring, and in many cases committing heinous crimes against our people. People like Laken Riley, a young girl at the University of Georgia who was raped and murdered while on a run by an illegal alien who should have never been in our country. This crisis was deliberate, and they did this for several reasons. First, and if they're honest tonight, they'll tell you this, they don't believe in borders. Second, they can't win anymore with the American people, and they see immigration as a way to import a new base of voters. Third, for how much they posture as caring about the working class, their donors love the cheap labor. And fourth, and they announced this, so it's not controversial to say, they want to radically alter the demographics and culture of this country. And so, while they're sipping margaritas with MS-13 gangsters, this administration has taken decisive action to solve the border crisis. Illegal border crossings have plummeted to the lowest levels in history. 2 million illegal aliens have already departed the country, and millions more are packing their bags. And so, in the memory of Laken Riley and the countless others who have suffered because of their extremism on immigration, we are going to work every single day to deliver a secure border for the American people. Thank you very much.
Fine if you wish to applause between rounds. That's fine, so between the speakers. Great. Thank you, Shri. We have now a response from the Democrats.
All right. First, I want to thank BridgeND for hosting this event because it is important to discuss the issues that are affecting this nation today, like immigration, because I agree, there is an immigration problem within this nation, but the current administration has gone too far. President Trump is right. Our cities are becoming war zones, but it's not the fault of the immigrants. No, it's the fault of the federal agents who are using war tactics against communities around the country. Take a look at Chicago, for example. ICE agents are using chemical agents. They're zip tying naked children. They're using Black Hawk helicopters and raiding apartments in the middle of the night. And they're kidnapping undocumented immigrants and US citizens alike, because this administration is tearing up the Constitution. This is an example of authoritarianism. No more due process rights under this administration, because the Republican Party is not the party of law and order. Not to mention the economic impact. Immigrants come to this country because they want to contribute to our economy. But like much of this administration's policy, it's short-sighted, and they're not thinking about the long-term impact that this will have on the safety within our communities and our economy. And I also want to make one thing straight. Undocumented immigrants, according to FBI crime data, commit less crime than American citizens. So this is not an issue. Now, this has gone too far, so far, that even Republicans disagree with what the administration is doing. In California, Republicans and Democrats have signed on to a resolution urging their congressional delegation to come together and pass a bipartisan immigration reform bill. And might I remind you, in 2024, Republicans and Democrats did come together, and they almost passed a bipartisan immigration act until someone killed it, President Donald Trump. Because President Trump does not care about solving the immigration crisis in this country. No. He cares more about tearing families apart and scoring cheap political points.
Good. Thank you, Alex. Republicans side, you have 2-minute response.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just go point by point on the Democrats' rebuttal to our points here. So the first point they brought up was that we've turned the cities into war zones by sending law enforcement there. No, the cities are actually, the city of Chicago and several other cities across the United States are some of the most dangerous cities in the developed world, much more dangerous than cities like Paris and other cities in Europe. So it's not the fault of Republicans that that's been happening. And the Immigration and Customs Enforcement is simply enforcing the law. They mentioned the usage of masks and weapons, in which case, in certain cases, but that's simply because the Democratic open border policy has allowed gang members and hundreds of people on the terrorist watch list into the country. So that's really the reason for why Immigration and Customs Enforcement is acting the way they are. They next talk about the economic impact, but they didn't actually talk at all about the economy, because if you look at the fiscal impact of illegal immigration, it's actually a $150 billion deficit, which means that they are taking $150 billion more in services than they're paying in taxes. And they also like to talk about, they run this economic populist playing point where they say wages are too low, wages have to go up. And then they say, well, we also need millions of people to enter the workforce and compete for jobs with American workers, which places downward pressure on wages. So this doesn't make any sense at all. And they said that illegal immigrants commit less crime than Americans. First of all, the FBI does not, when you arrest criminals, you don't actually ask for their immigration status, so there's no way to know that. But also, every crime committed by an illegal immigrant is a preventable crime because they never should have been here in the first place. So this is a totally irrelevant point. Next, they talk about this border bill. It was a fake bill because it only mandated enforcement at 8,000 people, and as President Trump shows, you didn't need a border bill, you just needed a new president for immigration enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri. 2-minute response from the Democrats.
Thank you. Blue cities across the country, Louisville, Chicago, Boston, crime rates were going down well before President Trump came into office. If you look at the policies, the actual policies in these cities, we have mayors and governors who are willing to take violence and violent crime on head on. Crime is going down with gun violence intervention policies in Boston and with also holding people accountable on the back end. We believe as the Democratic Party that we must hold violent criminals accountable, but we also must recognize that there is a mass incarceration problem in this nation. But instead of crime, let's go back to the actual topic, immigration. The last time that a bill was passed with comprehensive immigration legislation was in 1986. That effort was actually spearheaded by none other than Father Ted Hesburgh. He worked with Romano Mazzoli and Alan Simpson, a Republican, and Romano was a Democrat. They worked together to pass comprehensive legislation because they understood the impact both that border security has and that the economic benefit that immigrants bring to our nation. These are some of the most hardworking people in our nation. They contribute to our economy, and they are here for a right reason. We need to make sure that, yes, we are securing our border. Yes, we are cracking down on fentanyl that comes across the border. But at the same time, we must have a pathway to legal citizenship for these undocumented immigrants. We must protect children who come here not knowing another nation. We must protect DACA. These children are here. They don't know another language, they know English, and they were raised in the United States. We shouldn't be sending them to a country, and we shouldn't be putting them in front of a judge that doesn't know their language. We must be able to protect immigrants while also protecting the United States of America. We can do both.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. We move on now to the next topic, which is healthcare. And this time, the question is directed in the first place to the Democrats. And the question prepared by the organizers is as follows. What do you believe the federal government's role should be in ensuring healthcare access for all Americans? Should healthcare be treated as a public good, a market commodity, or something in between?
Thank you. Now, Democrats believe that healthcare is a human right. Democrats today support expanding the Affordable Care Act. We want to offer a public option on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. We believe that millions of Americans should be able to keep their private insurance plans if they want it, but we want to expand affordable health care so that every American in this country has access to an affordable health care plan. Now, Democrats believe this, but the current administration would rather shut down the government than give every American affordable health care. Now, you guys have probably heard a lot about the government shutdown in the recent news. Now, the reason that the government is shut down is because the administration wants to end what is called the premium tax credit. Now, if you shop within the Affordable Care Act marketplace, you qualify for what is called the premium tax credit. And the premium tax credit is a subsidy that lowers your health care premiums. And the Affordable Care Act halved the uninsured rate in this country. And it is a great example of how Democrats care about expanding health care access. We believe that health care should be expanded more, but this current administration is trying to lessen the health care that we see in this country. And that is not to mention the Medicaid cuts that we're seeing in the Big Beautiful Bill. Now, the Big Beautiful Bill cut Medicaid and is expected to kick millions of Americans off of their health insurance plans. And it's also expected to close rural hospitals. And my friends across the aisle might say that this is in the interest of saving money, but as estimated by the Congressional Budget Office, the deficit is expected to increase by $3.4 trillion due to the Big Beautiful Bill. So this is not in the interest of saving money. This is in the interest of harming the most vulnerable Americans. And there's just one last thing that I'd like to mention. Now, something that people like to say today is that the Medicaid cuts in the Big Beautiful Bill are simply taking away health care from undocumented immigrants. But this isn't true. Do you know how much federal funding goes to funding undocumented immigrants? less than 1%. And do you know what that less than 1% goes to fund? It makes sure that immigrants can receive emergency care funding so they don't bleed out in parking lots. Now, I don't support immigrants bleeding out in parking lots, and I don't think anybody should support immigrants bleeding out in parking lots, because everybody deserves treatment, and that is why Democrats support expanding health care for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Republicans, you have 3 minutes in response.
There were a lot of interesting points made right there. But first of all, the shutting down of the government is not because they want to provide everyone that's an American citizen with health care. It's because they want to provide illegal immigrants with health care. Giving national health care to a bunch of illegal immigrants just creates and spawns a wild bureaucracy that is untenable in this national sphere. We concur that health care is a human right, but health care as a basic necessity. We cannot be paying for every single surgery, every single brain transplant of every single person. There are optional things that cannot be covered by American citizens for other people. Healthcare expanded more under the big, beautiful bill. Like, you think Donald Trump, he said he does not want to cut a single penny of Medicare, and inside the big, beautiful bill, every single cut was just to the rampant bureaucracy. Second, Obamacare failed. Premiums skyrocketed. The Affordable Care Act has huge premiums, and because they couldn't get healthy people to buy in, millions of Americans lost the doctors that they liked. They had to go to separate hospitals, and even if they were a rural hospital, they were held and propped open by government funds when they were inefficient in the first place. This continued under Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which led to Medicare Part D needing a government bailout. Third, single-payer systems are disasters because of waiting lists, diminished care, and it is unsustainable without American subsidization of research and development costs that, like you see in Europe. In Europe, you can have these policies because Americans bear the brunt of the cost to these research and development for drugs. And then the president has taken action on hospital billing transparency and prescription drugs without breeding this untenable bureaucracy. He has cut out the middleman and made it easier for generics, combination drugs, and biosimilar products to reach the market. We would like to see a continuation of this approach, yielding political power to enable markets to support consumers without roadblocks. This would even consider like a Dutch healthcare reform in which there's a minor healthcare benefits for all American citizens, but this is untenable in our current scheme because there are millions of illegal immigrants in our country that will claim what is not theirs and steal American healthcare dollars and tax dollars.
Just to add on a little bit, first of all, on the government shutdown, what he said makes absolutely no sense because the Democrats are shutting down the government because they refused to vote for a bill, a continuing resolution that they voted for in March. So the idea that the Republicans have caused this shutdown makes no sense. And by shutting down the government, they are threatening essential healthcare services for Americans right now, including healthcare for women and children, telehealth services for Medicare, and community health centers that don't have funding anymore. And on the Medicaid cuts, because they mentioned that, the Big Beautiful Bill did not cut Medicaid. What it did is that it required people on Medicaid to work 20 hours a week to get free health care for the government. And I think that's a pretty reasonable proposal, so thank you.
Thank you, Republicans. Democrats, you have 2 minutes to respond.
All right. Now, I just want to go back to that same point about immigrants receiving health care funding. Undocumented immigrants only receive less than 1% of federal health care funds, and that's just to prevent them from bleeding out in parking lots. And now, I don't think anybody here wants immigrants to bleed out in parking lots. Now, I want to go to their next point, that Obamacare made healthcare premiums skyrocket. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, healthcare premiums actually rose at lower rates after the Affordable Care Act was passed. So in the decade previous to the Affordable Care Act, healthcare premiums rose at a much higher rate. But the Affordable Care Act actually lessened the increase of healthcare premiums. And now, they made a point about how Trump is cutting out the middleman and introducing a plan expected to cut the cost of prescription drugs. Now, Trump did release a plan to cut out the middleman. It's called Trump RX. But according to the Wall Street Journal, for the 90% of Americans who are on private health insurance plans, they will not save a single penny because this does not make prescription drugs cheaper, because the Trump administration is not actually concerned with lessening healthcare costs for Americans. President Trump does not have a healthcare plan. Democrats do. Now, we don't support a universal healthcare system. We believe that we should expand the marketplace. We think that the free market is great. Options are great. That is why we support introducing a public option only for those who want it, because we should make healthcare affordable for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Republicans, 2 minutes.
Well, let me just respond, first of all, to the Obamacare point, because I think this is really what's most important to consider, because it's what they actually did when they had power. This is the signature healthcare reform that they introduced, and it was Obamacare. And Obamacare failed for the fundamental reason that the model that it proposed, which is that basically you have these plans facilitated by the government, it didn't work because they weren't able to get enough healthy people to buy into the plans. So it was just full of sick people, and the premiums kept going up as a result of that. There's a study by the Kaiser Family Foundation that found that as a result of Obamacare, premiums rose 25% more than they would have otherwise. And in addition to that, because of the regulations that Obamacare introduced into the market, 4.7 million Americans lost access to their health care plans because of their reform. And so Obamacare has been a total disaster. What we propose is a health care plan that both it acknowledges the need for people to be covered and for the government to have a role in this, while also preserving the high quality of care that exists in a free market system, and that's the Dutch plan. And the Dutch plan, as Luke was explaining earlier, the benefit of the Dutch plan is that it is a public-private partnership in which private companies are obligated to sell a basic package of healthcare that the government subsidizes for people who can't afford. And this allows people to buy extra plans or extra benefits from the healthcare plan if they want. It also encourages competition because healthcare providers are still competing between one another. And this is a plan I think that could really work as opposed to it also equalizes the risk premium, I should add, so that it's not saturated with only unhealthy people, which raises premiums. And I think this is actually a plan that could work in contrast to Democrat failure on healthcare.
Furthermore, the Washington Post article that she mentioned about Trump RX only accounts for the Pfizer addition and not that Trump called for other companies to continue in this system.
Thank you, Luke. We now turn to our next topic, and the next topic is tariffs. The question gets posed first to the Republicans for their response, and the question on tariffs is as follows. Do tariffs strengthen America's bargaining power against rivals like China or weaken global alliances? In your hands.
Well, let me tell you the story on tariffs. For most of American history, the United States was a manufacturing superpower. It was a net exporter. It was an industrial powerhouse. And this manufacturing industry was built on tariffs. It was built first on the Hamiltonian tariff, which protected our infant industries. It was then built on the American system. Then it was built on the McKinley tariff. And this dominance persisted until very recently. But in the late 20th century, our elites decided to throw that all away. The United States lowered its tariff barriers, it joined the WTO, and it embraced the fiction of free trade with countries that did anything but. And the most famous example of this is China, which soon after gaining permanent normal trade relations status and joining the WTO, decided to subsidize its own industries, block American products from its country, steal intellectual property, and devalue its currency. And the result was that we lost our manufacturing dominance, and we became an economy based entirely off the selling of assets and debt to other countries, enriching a couple of elites, people who work in finance, at the expense of the American worker, at the expense of places like South Bend, Indiana. And the president's tariffs affirm the fundamental principle that making things in America matters. It matters for our jobs and our wages. A good factory job cannot be replaced by cheap TVs or from China or cheap iPhones from India. These are jobs that provide stability, that provide the ability to start a family for a lot of workers. Manufacturing is also important for innovation. What you build today, what you produce today, determines what you can produce tomorrow. So if you have no capital investment going on today, you're never going to get more productive. And this is what we've seen, a stagnation in productivity in the United States. And lastly, it matters for our national security. Because currently we have supply chains for products such as semiconductors, for pharmaceuticals, for batteries, for critical minerals. They're all based on other countries. And so that places our national security in serious jeopardy. And as a result of the president's tariffs, we have already secured major results, both in terms of concessions from other countries and major investments and commitments from companies. For example, the European Union has dropped all of its tariffs, including a 10% auto tariff on our products, and pledged to invest $600 billion in America over the next few years. Dozens of companies, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Honda, Hyundai, and more, are pledging to bring back manufacturing to America, are pledging billions of dollars in investment that are going to create good-paying jobs for American workers. So on trade, the Trump administration is unburdening itself from what has been, and we're bringing jobs and growth back for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri. 3-minute response from the Democrats.
This is Donald Trump's economy. Unaffordable houses, skyrocketing costs, atrocious job reports. Donald Trump's first campaign promise was to better the economy. It was to fight inflation. And what was his second campaign promise? To impose retaliatory tariffs. It's impossible to square those two initiatives. Unfortunately, Americans are learning this the hard way. Tariffs are incredibly short-sighted in a modern, globalized economy, which America has been a powerful player in the modern economy. Let's talk about one example. In my home state of Kentucky, last year we did $40 billion of exports. $9 billion of those were to Canada. And the other side likes to point to job growth that's going to magically happen that comes with tariffs. But in Kentucky, when those tariffs were imposed, 300 Louisvillians were laid off from Brown-Forman, one of the biggest distilleries. And those are high-paying jobs. So the idea that tariffs just magically create jobs, especially in industries that are no longer need the same amount of workers, it's ridiculous. And let's think about basic economics here. When input costs go up, supply goes down. We have a situation where costs are going to skyrocket, and that's part of the reason why inflation is so high right now. Now the federal government is set to bail out soybean farmers after Trump imposed tariffs on China. Well, last I heard, the GOP was against government handouts, but now because of Trump's policy, we have to give them out in order to bail out our hardworking American farmers who put food on our table. Let's put it simply. Tariffs are a tax. Who feels the impact of this tax? You, me, consumers, Americans. And we are feeling the impact. 7 in 10 Americans in battleground states say that the grocery costs are rising. 40% of Americans in battleground states who describe themselves as MAGA are saying that their grocery costs are rising. What is Donald Trump doing? He earned their vote, and now what is he doing for them? He's not fighting inflation. According to the Yale Budget Lab, there's an expected increase in costs for the American family ranging between $2,300 and $4,400 yearly. I don't know about you, but that's the difference in going on vacation with your family. That's the difference in being able to support your child, to send them to a quality education. $2,000 might not go a long way for Donald Trump, but it goes a long way for most American families. We have to remember, tariffs are imposing burdens on the single mom in Phoenix, and the downtown South Bend grocery store, and farmers in Iowa who can't get their farm equipment now.
Thank you, Alex. Republican, short response.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about the main argument he made here. First, he talks about housing. That's really funny because I think you brought in 10 million illegal immigrants, so maybe that put a little pressure on housing. Also, in the states that you run, you don't allow people to build more housing because of zoning laws. So I don't think tariffs have anything to do with this unless we're building our houses in China now, too. Next, he talks about inflation. Inflation, this is just hilarious because inflation is 3%. When Biden was president, it was 9%. And inflation is actually at record lows over the last few years. And that's because tariffs don't cause inflation, because what causes inflation are either two things. One is a supply shock, which doesn't happen here because imports are 12% of goods. And the second is it's a increase in aggregate demand, which happens when there's more money in the economy chasing fewer goods, which is not the case at all because tariffs don't increase the money supply. What increases the money supply is what they did when Biden was president in borrowing $4 trillion. What tariffs do, even if we concede the point that tariffs raise the prices of certain goods, which is not at all true because of price elasticity, but even if we concede this point, all that means is that certain foreign goods are more expensive, but the households then have less money to spend on domestic goods, which means the prices of those domestic goods fall, which means that on net, there is no increase in the price level, and any economist would tell you that because it's the same for any other tax. It's the same way how a sales tax doesn't increase the price level or an income tax because it doesn't change money supply. So this is a totally nonsensical argument. Also, the Biden administration, it's worth noting, maintain President Trump's tariffs on China. So if tariffs were causing these terrible policies, they were causing massive inflation, then why didn't the Biden administration get rid of them? Why did they maintain the tariffs that the Trump administration approved? And the reality is because they didn't cause inflation. And tariffs are fantastic, frankly.
Thank you. Democrats, you have the last word. 2 minutes in response on this topic.
Tariffs don't cause inflation. Wow. I want you to go into your economics class tomorrow and ask your professor if tariffs cause inflation. Just see what they say. But let's talk about the China tariffs. Donald Trump increased his tariffs from the first term to the second term. So we're not talking about the same level of tariffs. We're talking about a whole new set of tariffs. They're now increasing cost. And yes, inflation was high towards the end of the Biden administration. We'll admit that. But you know why it was so high? It's high because Joe Biden saved the economy from an imminent recession. We need to talk about how tariffs are affecting the everyday person. And it's not just families who are most cost burdened. It's you going to your Starbucks in LaFine. The price of a coffee has increased significantly. It's everyday items that are directly affected by increasing costs. We need to have a recognition that tariffs are directly in line, directly correlated to inflation. And yes, we should incentivize American manufacturing, but we have to remember that there are certain industries that simply aren't coming back. The kind of manufacturing jobs that were in the Rust Belt, like Detroit and Gary, they're not magically coming back because we have these tariffs. I'd like to talk to the local leaders in Gary. Let's talk to the local leaders in Detroit and see what they think the impact of tariffs are. We must find a way to decrease inflation, to support a housing market. And yes, we need to find ways to support affordable housing, which can include zoning reform, which Democratic mayors are taking upon themselves. That's a point of agreement that mayors on the Republican and Democrat side are working together. Tariffs cause inflation. Ask your professor.
Thank you, Alex. We turn now to a foreign policy question looking at one of the most dramatic, volatile, and violent conflicts of our time externally, the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the question, which will be addressed first by the Democrats, is as follows. How should the US balance its commitment to Israel's security with concerns over Palestinian human rights in Gaza and the West Bank? Democrats have 3 minutes.
Middle Eastern politics are complex, but empathy is not. We can be supportive of Israel as a strategic ally while also encouraging them to use restraint. Good friends hold each other accountable. We must encourage Israel to hold themselves accountable and to exercise restraint. There's talk tonight of a deal being reached, and I am hopeful that that comes to fruition. President Biden and President Trump actually, during the intermission between the two administrations, coordinated a strategy to try to reach a peace deal in Gaza. This notion that you can only be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, it's blatantly false. We must support the right of Israel to exist, but we must also recognize suffering when we see it. When you see pictures of bloody children, when you see reports of churches being bombed, do not harden your hearts. Be willing to empathize. Be willing to feel for those families. Pope Francis spoke frequently about a globalization of indifference. We must hold ourselves accountable and not succumb to indifference. I'm hopeful that our friends on the other side of the aisle will agree that we need to find a plan for peace. I think Democrats and Republicans should be equally committed to finding those avenues. And we must be willing to talk about what empathy looks like when it comes to policy. Empathy is being willing to stand up for that family in Gaza, but it's also being willing to hold Netanyahu accountable. Like I said, Middle Eastern politics are complicated, but we can find avenues to be empathetic and to also work towards peace. Tonight, as our leaders meet to try to find and foster cooperation, I'm hopeful that they will be willing to do so and that we'll be able to strike a deal that brings lasting peace to the Middle East.
Thank you, Alex. Republicans, 3-minute response.
Thank you very much. And, I want to note on this issue that Democrats like to talk a big game on Israel. They like to go and harass people at restaurants, stop the genocide. They like to block streets. They like to, hide out in tents on college campuses. But when push came to shove, when they had 4 years to handle this crisis, President Biden got absolutely rolled by Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, he gave him unconditional aid. He failed to stop the offensive in Rafah. He failed to do anything to get Israel to minimize civilian casualties. And he made zero effort at all to end the war. He said, Netanyahu, you want more money, you'll get more money. And so we agree with some of what they're saying right now. We agree that what is happening in Israel, in Gaza rather, is a humanitarian crisis. We agree that the Israeli conduct in the war has gone way too far. And we agree that the broader escalation of this war in the region is not in American interests. The difference is that President Trump has actually used leverage over Israel, has talked about the accountability, has acted on the accountability that they're talking about to force Israel to the negotiating table. And as a result of his efforts, as even he's talking about, a peace deal supported by both Israel and Hamas, as well as our international allies, both in the Arab world and in Europe, is on the horizon to end this war. Already, as I speak tonight, the bombings in Gaza have stopped, and Hamas has committed publicly to releasing the hostages as a result of this agreement. So with the Democrat administration, you got a lot of rhetoric, you got a lot of blocked college campuses. With the Republican administration, you got results to solving this crisis.
And I'd also like to thank you guys for bringing up the Pope Francis quote on how we need to stop this nature of indifference in America. The problem that we've pointed out is that Joe Biden did foster that indifference in his administration. And his signals of weakness, such as his horrendous pullout of Afghanistan, leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment over in a foreign country, signaled to people that will commit violence in the Middle East that it's okay. This is a horrible precedent to set. And this plan that you brought up during the interim between Biden and Trump, whenever they met, they had very little in common. And that's why Israel violated multiple ceasefires post this supposed plan. And this is why Trump's current plan is going to be far more lasting.
Thank you, Luke. Democrats, your response.
I think most Americans would agree that it's a good thing that we're no longer in Afghanistan. And we pray, of course, for the repose of the souls that we lost. But let's talk about the Israel-Palestine issue. President Trump is now using a plan that was actually majorly put together by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So we need to be willing to say that cooperation can exist. I don't know why it's so hard to say that Republicans and Democrats can't work together on an issue that is in the best national interest of the United States of America. We have a foreign security problem in the Middle East. And fortunately, we had leaders and a Democratic administration who were willing to hand over their notes, willing to hand over their plan, because they knew the top priority should be securing peace in the Middle East. And that is in the best interest of the United States' national security. So I don't think this is a red or blue issue. I think this is an issue that's about saving lives in the Middle East. And I'm glad, I'm overjoyed that Republicans and Democrats are willing to work together on this issue.
Great, thank you, Alex. Republicans?
Yeah, I would just, the main point he made here is that it was the Democrats who helped get this agreement through. And, you know, if they actually did do that, I wouldn't be opposed to giving them some credit and saying that, you know, there was cooperation, but it just didn't really happen. I mean, what's happening here is that the Biden administration surrendered to Israel, basically, and they acted like Israel was a superpower. President Biden gave Netanyahu everything he wanted. The Trump administration then changed approaches. The Trump administration used leverage over Israel to get Netanyahu to withdraw his forces, to stop the bombings, to finally come to the negotiating table. It was the Trump administration that came up with this 20-point plan. It was not the Biden administration. So I think what they're doing here is they understand that this peace plan is a success, or at least that it's going to be a success, and they're trying to take credit for something that they had very little involvement in contributing to. And look, I'm not against his bipartisan appeal on this issue. I do agree that there is room for Republicans and Democrats to work together on this. But I also think it's important to understand the differences between how these two administrations handled the conflict and the reality of the peace deal that is now being implemented.
I concur with just about everything that they said about their deal, but again, like what Shree's pointing out, is that they're taking credit for something that's not theirs. Moving forward the rest of this presidency, we see a stark contrast to what happened under Joe Biden's 4 years. It was seriously nothing that happened. There were no active policy measures that were put forth in order to stop this conflict that resulted in any meaningful difference.
Good, thank you. We move now back to the domestic arena. The question concerns political violence, and the question, which will be addressed first by the Republicans, is: does condemning political violence equally on all sides help reduce polarization, or does it risk oversimplifying deep inequalities of power?
We must condemn all political violence, because a democracy cannot exist in which political violence is accepted, or even just, as they quoted earlier, the Pope Francis quote, an indifference society is not possible to prosper in a democratic system. You look at the last month, we have seen several acts of left-wing extremism. You look at the Annunciation shooting by a trans activist, attacks on ICE agents, brutal murder of Ariana Zatinsky, and because she was white. And of course, the death of Charlie Kirk, something that weighs heavy on all of our hearts. We're on a campus, we're speaking out, and we're trying to figure out and get to the base of the issues of our time. We cannot tolerate this political violence that is in a large part coming from the left, and even to the small effect that it is coming from the right, it's from the extreme sects that no one else identifies with. Whenever you look at the polling data, Democrats support in a poll that says 55% of them, they would view killing Trump or Musk as somewhat justified. A plurality have favored this view of Luigi Mangione, who murdered a healthcare CEO in cold blood, and the college Democrats will tell you tonight that they do not support this. They have issued a statement to say to the effect that, and I can appreciate that they disavow political violence, but they don't represent their whole party. They've been on the outliers of their party, and 58 Democratic congressmen and women have voted against the Charlie Kirk resolution in Congress. This is just unacceptable. As we debate tonight, the Democratic Attorney General of Virginia is facing a scandal in his home state for calling his political opponents to be given 2 bullets to the head, but he didn't stop there. He also claimed that his opponent was raising little fascists. Referring to these children, he wished the death upon them as well. Children, and not a single Democrat in the state, nor a single donor, not a single one, has called for Jones to drop out of the race or even stop supporting him. Senator Tim Kaine reaffirmed his support for him the other day. This is a party that long ago abandoned political mainstream. Democrats are the party of chaos, they're the party of disorder, and violence that we can no longer afford to see them and we can no longer afford to have them in power.
Thank you, Luke. Democrats, 3 minutes in response.
February 14th, 2022 is a day I will never forget. I was interning for Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg. Fortunately, I was not there that day, but a man walked into our office. When he arrived, he was greeted by our staff, only to pull out a 9mm Glock and get off 6 rounds, nearly killing our candidate and my coworkers. Fortunately, the bullet grazed his sweater. There's still a hole about this size in that green sweater, but he escaped this horrific act of political violence. Political violence has no place in the United States of America. Absolutely none. And violence is violence. We all have a responsibility to turn down the temperature. We should be horrified by attacks on everyone from the mayor to Charlie Kirk, the assassination attempts. It's horrific, and you can't put into words just how awful it is when people take extra institutional means to try to influence policy. It's terrorism and it's grotesque. But it's also not acceptable to try to turn cold-blooded murder into a culture war. I think we should be better than that. I think we should rise above political noise and be willing to come together to condemn political violence in the strongest of terms, unequivocally. Elected officials need to recognize the power of their words, and that includes Democrats before they go on CNN, and that includes Republicans before they go on Fox News. Words have power. And you should not be willing to go on a cable news network with no consequences and say that you want to demonize the other side. Of course, we have a freedom of speech, but just because you have a right to say something does not make it right to say that thing. We must be appalled by political violence, and we must have events like we're having tonight at Bridge, where we're coming together, where we're talking about the issues, where we're willing to debate in a civil way. I respect Shri, I respect Luke, and we're willing to have these conversations because we recognize the dignity of the person and the identity of being an American, of being a Notre Dame student, of being a friend has to come before the label of being a Democrat or a Republican. We must continue to condemn unequivocally political violence, and we must say that it has no place in American politics.
Thank you, Alex. Republicans, your response.
Look, I think that was a very nice speech, and I agree with him. But the problem is his party doesn't agree with him. And if you look at the polling statistics that we mentioned, I think this makes it very clear. A recent poll published in Fox News, but not conducted by an outside third party, said that 55% of Democrats would view killing President Trump or Elon Musk as at least partially justified. A plurality, as Luke pointed out, have a favorable view of Luigi Mangione, who shot a healthcare CEO in cold blood. And there were plenty of people, there were Democrats who voted against the Charlie Kirk resolution. There were plenty of people on this campus, including a professor, who celebrated Mr. Kirk's death. And I think the most important point here is what's going on in Virginia, because they can say that they're against political violence, but unless they're willing to actually act according to their words, even when it's not politically convenient for them, that means absolutely nothing. And to restate what's going on in Virginia, we have a Democratic candidate for Attorney General who called for his political opponent to be given 2 bullets to the head, wished death on his children. And, they can give speeches about how much they love dialogue all they want. But the fact is, not a single Democrat in the state, not a single Democrat has called for him to drop out of the race. So if they're not willing to, sacrifice a little bit of political convenience for this cause, then they don't believe in it at all. And from what we've seen so far, with not a single Democrat coming out against this candidate in Virginia, I have to believe that what they're saying is nothing more than empty rhetoric.
This is really just continuation of a trend. I mean, Trump's been called Hitler on multiple networks, and this language of fascism and comparing the modern administration to a government where people are going to be murdered or going to be exterminated is just unacceptable in political discourse.
Thank you, Luke. Democrats, your response, 2 minutes.
All right. I want to thank my Republican colleagues for condemning the violence that we see today and condemning people calling President Trump Hitler. But might I remind you all that current Vice President J.D. Vance went on CNN and called President Trump like Hitler. Now, I think it's important that we condemn extremism on both sides of the aisle, because extremism is dangerous and it plagues this nation. And we have to call out all forms of political violence we see, no matter what side it falls on. But what we also have to do is stop with the divisive rhetoric. We have to stop making the other side the other. Now, in 1972, there were two candidates for president who couldn't have been any more different: Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm and Governor George Wallace of Alabama. Governor George Wallace was left paralyzed after an assassination attempt on his life. Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm visited him in the hospital to pray with him. Governor Wallace asked her, "What will your people have to say about this?" Congresswoman Chisholm responded and said, "Some things are more important than politics." That is a message that I want all of us today to remember. Some things are more important than politics. Because at the end of the day, politics is about policy, coming together and figuring out policies to make the average lives of Americans better. We have to be able to bridge the political divide through conversations like this. We have to come together, treat each other with respect, remember each other's humanness, because that is the only way that we can make this country a better place. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Excuse me, we move now to the last two questions, and then I'll open this up for questions from the audience. The first question goes to the Democrats only, with no response from the Republicans, and then I put a similar question to the Republicans, no response from the Democrats, and the questions have to do with what we're referring to as the median voter. The question to the Democratic Party then is as follows. Many chalk up the 2024 Harris presidential campaign loss to misaligned priorities, focus on DEI, for example. Do you believe that the Harris campaign / Biden administration represented the median Democratic voter? And what would you like to see from the Democratic Party moving into the midterms? Democrats.
All right. Now, I firmly believe that the Biden administration and the Harris campaign not only represented the average Democratic voter, but I believe that they represented the average American. But as Democrats, we have to call our party out on our failures. We have a fundamental messaging problem. Now, I'd first like to discuss the Biden administration's legislative achievements. The CHIPS Act, which created many manufacturing jobs, invested money into research and development to keep us competitive with China. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which increased broadband for millions of Americans and invested in our infrastructure. And the American Rescue Plan, which cut healthcare costs and cut child poverty in half. Now, this is an example of how Democrats care about bettering the quality of life for all Americans. But like I said, we have a messaging problem. There's a reason that we lost in 2024, and it's because we failed to listen to what the American people needed. We told them what we thought they wanted to hear, rather than listen to what they needed from us. Our party has a lot of soul searching to do. We still have a long way to go. But I believe that as a big tent party, we will come together to create a message that resonates with all Americans. We have plenty of disagreement within our own party. But like Thomas Jefferson said, disagreement of opinion leads to inquiry, and inquiry to truth. This message resonates with Democrats. It is a principle that guides our party, and it guides us to work across the aisle, connect with Republicans, because Democrats understand that the only way that we can create a better future and a more perfect union for Americans is by working together with Democrats who disagree, working together with Republicans, independents, people of all political beliefs. And now our politics today is at a dangerous point because many people are fragmented. They're individuals. They're not a part of the collective. People would rather isolate themselves into factions rather than listen to those who disagree. But I believe that the Democratic Party is in the best interest of the American people. The Democratic Party cares most about cutting healthcare costs so that people don't have to ration their insulin prescriptions to survive. I believe that the Democratic Party wants to make housing affordable for all. And I believe that the Democratic Party wants to cut costs so that people can put groceries on their table. That is the vision that Democrats believe in. Thank you.
Thank you. Republicans, your question is as follows. Some traditional Republican voters have reported that they find it hard to identify with the current iteration of the party. Do you believe the Trump administration represents the median Republican voter? And what would you like to see from the Republican Party moving into midterms?
Thank you for the question. First, just one sentence response. The only industry that boomed under Biden was private security, so thanks very much. But first of all, for all the talk about how this isn't your father's Republican Party anymore, or how much the Republican Party has changed, and for all the talk about polarization, I just want to point out it's the Democratic Party that has moved radically out of the political mainstream. The Democratic Party 30 years ago voted for border security. They voted for a border wall. Now they host vigils for deported gangsters. The Democratic Party of 30 years ago voted for the 1994 crime bill, which significantly lessened violent crime in this country. Now they're running a candidate in New York City who wants to abolish prisons. The Democratic Party voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. Now they deny lunch money to public schools who won't allow men to play on the women's sports teams. The Democratic Party was once for racial equality. Now they support DEI, which is just a way of saying open anti-white discrimination in employment and education. And meanwhile, you cannot name, and I would challenge them to do this if there's another segment, you cannot name a single issue on which the GOP is more conservative on than 1990. It doesn't exist. If the Republican Party has changed over the last decade, it's pretty much just in response to their extremism. That's the story of the last 30 years of American politics. It's the Democrats who have tried to impose a radical agenda onto society. DEI, infinity immigration, bake the cake or we're shutting down your business, perform the abortion or you're not a doctor anymore. And Republicans have said, hey, maybe let's not do that. That's been the story of American politics. But as far as what the Republican Party stands for, we stand for common sense. Now that might sound cliche, but we stand really for things both parties agreed on for decades before the Democratic Party decided to abandon the political mainstream. We're for fiscal responsibility, the idea that we shouldn't be spending infinite money, the idea that revenues and expenditures should be somewhat even, at least. We're for strong industry, believe in strong manufacturing jobs. We talked about that earlier tonight. We're for law and order, the radical idea that you should be able to walk around your street without fear of being killed. We're for marriage. We stand for life, and we stand for the traditional family. We believe, and our policies are oriented towards the idea that you should be able to own your own home and to start a family and raise a family on a single income. And finally, we're for a secure border, for reduced immigration, and we think the American government should put Americans first on our soil. So that's the Republican platform. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. All right, we open now to questions from the audience. If you wish to ask a question, raise your hand, please. And do we have roving mics? We do? Yeah. So I'm recognizing guy at the back. Yep, you got it, and then we'll go to the left. Sorry about that. So you can pose a question to either side or to both sides. If you pose a question to one side, they will have 2 minutes to respond, and then the other side will have a 2-minute opportunity to comment on the same question. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you all. I have a question for the college Republicans. During the segment on political violence, the claim was made that there's widespread support in the Democratic Party for increasing political violence towards certain leaders in the Republican Party. But I was just curious to hear your response to some of the claims made by the current president of the United States, one of which was that the US intelligence community is similar to Nazi Germany, that the Biden administration was a Gestapo administration. He once suggested that Second Amendment people might be able to prevent Hillary Clinton from being able to pick judges. In 2020, he reposted a video of a supporter saying, "The only good Democrat is a dead Democrat." And he also stoked his supporters to storm the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, leading to the deaths of several Capitol Police officers, and then upon taking office in 2025, pardoning those rioters.
Good, thank you for the question. Republicans, you have 2 minutes. I'd be grateful if the clock is still operating when the Republicans begin, and then Democrats have 2 minutes. And then I'll move to a question that was on my left.
It's easy to take quotes out of context, and even though some of those quotes that I would say were very imprudent, you have to be careful with how you respond to things, and our president he's a very brash man in some respects. But you bring up things such as January 6th, and you say 2 Catholic police officers died. They died of unrelated reasons, days after the fact, and you can't even subsidize that yourself. You can't even justify that yourself. Furthermore, the only person that died on site was a woman that was unarmed who was shot dead. Political violence in America and political speech, the idea that conservatives are far more radical in this respect is just wrong. If you can watch a liberal news outlet for less than a minute, and you'll immediately see somebody just turning to the other side and just talking with hate.
Yeah, I'll respond to the rest of that question. Trump called the DNI the Gestapo. Wow, because the Democrats have never used rhetoric like that. They've never called anyone a fascist, and that definitely hasn't led to anyone committing acts of political violence. And he uses, you're using examples of Twitter videos in which the president probably didn't even watch the full thing. He kind of just retweeted it. So these are just sort of cherry-picked quotes. They don't represent a pattern by Republicans. I think we should look at what's actually happened, which is in the last month we've had a transgender shooter open fire at a Catholic church because they were apparently fascists for believing in 2 genders. We've had attacks on ICE agents where a shooter who said, "I hate ICE" on the bullets went and opened fire at 2 agents. We've had the brutal murder of Irina Zarutska simply because she was white, and we've had the shooting of Charlie Kirk. So you're talking about Twitter videos. I'm talking about literal left-wing, an epidemic, frankly, of left-wing terrorism. And again, on the January 6th thing, how many people were killed on January 6th by the protesters? 0.
Thank you, Republicans. Democrats, 2 minutes.
You know, there's an old saying, when the law is on your side, pound the law. When the facts are on your side, pound the facts. When neither are on your side, pound the table. We see a lot of table pounding today from Republicans across the country. From Donald Trump, who, you're right, he doesn't have the attention span to watch a full video on Twitter. I'm concerned by that. I want a president that has the level-headedness to be able to lead our nation to whether he's purporting political violence or whether he's just randomly posting Twitter videos. I want a president, personally, who has the attention span to sit through a briefing, who understands what policy means. I don't think that's revolutionary to say, and I hope that college Republicans will push for a Republican candidate in the future who can condemn political violence, doesn't use extreme language, and can watch a full video.
Thank you. There's a question that was on the left, and then I'll come to the table to my immediate left.
Okay, so this has been a hot button issue in Congress and just in the government as a whole. But do you guys, and this is for all of you, do you guys think the Trump administration's handling of the Epstein files is in the best interest of the American people? Thank you.
Good, thank you. We'll start with the Democrats this time, and then we'll move to the Republicans.
Let's release the files. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. The sex trafficking of minors, of young girls, it's unacceptable, and the elite Republicans and others who are on the island need to be held accountable. We support the law and order of finding those perpetrators. And it's so concerning to me that we have a president of the United States who isn't willing to release files that contain crucial information that the American public has a right to know about. I mean, why else do you not release the files? I don't get it. Maybe you all can explain it to me why we're not releasing the files. But I think the American people have a right to know who the perpetrators are and which among them are still around those circles.
Thank you. Republicans?
Yes, I will get to your question, but I do want to note that he talked about having a president who can sit through a briefing. Dude, your candidate was Joe Biden. I'm sorry, but I do need to point that out. But getting back to the question of the Epstein files, he says, release the files, release the files. Why aren't they releasing the files? And look, I want the files released, sure. But the fact is, the Epstein files existed when Joe Biden was president too. And Joe Biden didn't release the Epstein files either. So I think to use this as a line of political attack, I don't think it makes a lot of sense because both administrations could have released the files. I'm not privy to why they're not being released. I think it may have to do with Epstein's involvement in foreign intelligence, but I'm not quite sure about that. I would hope to see the files released as well.
I concur.
Good, thank you. Someone put their hand up. Okay, that question's been asked. So let's go over there to student with the hat on, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you. Hi, this is a question for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. My question to both of you is what would you say right now to people in their homes, afraid that their neighbors are going to be taken in the middle of the night, afraid that they won't be able to cover childcare or have medical insurance, or people who are currently in an instability moment in their lives, who are afraid of paying for college, or coming home today after school and not seeing their parents? What advice do you give to them, and what words of hope can you present to them today? Thank you.
Republicans first.
Your question has a lot of rhetoric laid inside of it, and I think it's like in good faith still. But if this person is in your context, I'm assuming they're an illegal immigrant, and that's why you believe that they're going to be taken from their homes. They're breaking the law, and front up, we have to enforce the law in this country. We're finally restoring peace to this country. Trump is putting forth what Americans have believed for time immemorial, and this really gets down to the question, you can talk about how people are afraid, you can talk about these internal fears, and you can actually manifest them in people by speaking this way. And we need to cut through this and see the underlying beliefs at the bottom. Like, whether or not people have a right to be in this country or not is the bottom line. And so just because people are afraid, maybe they should be afraid, because I'm not trying to say that we're invoking any animus towards them, but if they're breaking the law in this country, it will be enforced.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but if it is about illegal immigration, then I basically concur with what Luke said. You shouldn't have come illegally. I don't think if you break into someone's house and you expect them to clothe you and house you and feed you in perpetuity, then I think you're mistaken, and I think that person has the right to kick you out of their home. And if you violate the sovereignty of the United States and expect the United States to reward you with health care and other resources, then I think you're sorely mistaken, and you should go back.
Democrats.
All right, now the reality you describe sounds a lot like the current day under the Trump administration. And now people are afraid, undocumented immigrants and US citizens, because ICE agents around this country are arresting undocumented immigrants and US citizens, and they're zip tying them and torturing them. And because this administration is promoting an atmosphere of authoritarianism, because it reaches a certain point where you're not concerned with public safety and you're concerned with a crackdown on the freedom within this country. Now, the Trump administration is not concerned with cutting costs for the average American, but the Democratic Party is. The Democratic Party has a plan to make sure that you can afford your health care. The Democratic Party has a plan to make sure that you can afford your groceries. And might I mention that at the end of Biden's term, the United States actually had the most GDP growth and the lowest rate of inflation out of all G7 nations, because Democrats understand how to make life better for all Americans. Thanks.
Thank you. Student in front of me.
This question is posed to both tables, and ideally all four of you if you so wish. In the spirit of the reason we're here today, so we live in a two-party system where, I mean, on a lot of issues, it seems like both parties come down on, exactly the opposite side of said issue. Would each of you state one policy within your own respective party that you disagree with on an individual level?
Democrats?
All right. So for me personally, an issue that I find myself disagreeing with Democrats on is the military. Now, I was raised in a family that believes in the power and strength of the military. My father served in the Army National Guard for 30 years. And I think that what makes us powerful as a nation and what keeps us safe is funding our military and increasing funding for our military, because we have to remain safe. And this is something that I oftentimes find myself disagreeing with Democrats on, because a lot of members within my party do believe that we should cut funding to the Defense Department. But I disagree with that.
I would say that I disagree with some Democrats who are adopting policies that could be considered softer on crime. While I think we have a mass incarceration problem, we also need to be able to recognize that violent crime is unacceptable and we need to hold perpetrators accountable. I think Democrats can do a better job of that. There are some examples, Boston, for instance, where they have gun violence intervention that's been incredibly successful. So they're working to meet with community members to try to get those guns off the street and encourage them to find alternative mediation before they try to take a violent approach. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we have judges who are being too soft on crime. Democrats need to acknowledge that we have some policies in cities that are not holding violent criminals accountable. We should not have a system that lets someone who committed a violent homicide, a murder, or armed burglary go the next day. It's just unacceptable, and we need to have a reckoning where we're advancing policy that promotes law and order, but also promotes a way to decrease recidivism and give people an opportunity moving forward.
Thank you, Democrats. Republicans?
Yeah, I think we've got two different answers here, so I think I'll go first. And I think my answer would be that I don't think the Republicans have done quite enough on fiscal responsibility. I think especially in today's Republican Party, you see a lot of resistance to making any sort of reform to Social Security, which is a sort of a Ponzi scheme, frankly, that's going to bankrupt this country. And I think we need to seriously consider raising the retirement age or cutting benefits in order to keep the program solvent and to stop frankly, a debt apocalypse from consuming the nation over the next couple of decades, because what you see is that debt is already at 13%, interest payments are already 13% of federal revenue, and that's going to continue to climb and really strangle our financial flexibility. And it's the same on taxes. A lot of Republicans argue in perpetuity we need lower taxes, we need more tax cuts. That's a horrible idea. I think we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to make sure that revenues and spending are balanced, and I think the Republican Party needs to do a lot of better job on that.
I am avidly pro-life, and I'm on the Right to Life board at this campus, and I believe that the Trump administration's current stance on the right to life is that this issue is settled within the current administration. I can understand the political realities behind this, and you have to be prudent within this current scheme. But I am calling for further pro-life protections inside the United States, and that if you're Catholic, you just have to support that.
Thank you, Republicans. We're at the end of our time. Before I hand over to the organizers, let me say I'm sorry that there's not more time for audience questions. I'm really impressed by the debaters, by all four of you. Well done. I want to highlight some of the positive features. You're well prepared, which is great for this kind of complex political discussion. You've been responsive, which indicates that you're listening. You don't have to agree, but you're responding to what you hear. Many of the responses are based on evidence, which is critical in informed political debate. We may disagree on evidence, but our debates need to be informed by evidence as well as our values and norms. I think you demonstrate, all of you, a breadth of knowledge that is remarkable. I mean, we grow up in a university, I think, to be specialists, but if you want to be involved in the political arena, you have to cover a wide range of different topics with confidence and competence, so well done on that. You are all succinct, thank you. It's the nightmare of the moderator, that you keep running over time you didn't, so thank you for being disciplined. And I think we're all grateful that there was common ground that you identified. So once more, round of applause to all the 4 debaters. And I hand over to the organizers.
Thank you to Professor Nathan, our 4 debaters, my wonderful executive board, and you all for making this debate a success. Our next BridgeND meeting is October 27th, and we would love to see you there. Thank you for coming. Have a great night.